I've come across a number of odd cases in my field of work, but none quite so deadly as this one. They say that when you are near death, your whole life flashes before your eyes, but that's not true. All there is the encroaching void and the sweet release of oblivion. And pain. So much pain. After a relaxing weekend at Finger Lakes with John, I was feeling refreshed, rejuvenated, and ready to get back to work. Many of the cases were simple, with only one requiring a removal. Those are never easy, taking a child from their family, but I rest easy knowing it was for the best, and that they'll be safer. It was Thursday evening as I was driving home, sitting in traffic in downtown Manhattan, when Vicky's name flashed on the dash display alerting me to the call. I pressed the button on the steering wheel to answer and waited a moment for it to connect. "Hey, Vicky." "Miranda, hey, got another call for you," my boss said. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. The calls at night were always the worst, especially with the streak I seemed to be on. "Mom called this one in. 6-year-old girl named Maya Ramish. Lives with her dad, Adish Ramish. Parents are divorced. Mom, Sarah Evans. Gets her on weekends. When Mom got her this weekend, she said Maya looked really sick. Told Dad to take her to the doctor, but he hasn't yet, and she's still pretty ill." "Alright, send me the address. I'll check in on them," I said, clicking the blinker and turning down a side street to turn around. By the time I arrived at the brick apartment building over in West Village, the street was bathed in a warm, rosy glow as the sun began its journey beyond the horizon. A group of kids sat on the sidewalk out front playing with trading cards. It had been an unusually warm day, and all I required to be outside was a light jacket. As I stepped out of my car, I noticed a little girl with long brown hair tied in braids sitting on the apartment building steps. Looking at the group of laughing children forlornly, I approached her, smiling softly so as not to spook her. "I see you watching them. Why don't you go ask to play?" The girl looked at me with big, chocolate-colored eyes. "They won't let me play," she said, coughing into her sleeve. Her tan skin had a sickly pallor and dark bags under her eyes. Realization dawned on me as I took her in. "You must be Maya. I'm Miranda. Your mommy was worried about you. Are you feeling okay?" Maya shrugged indifferently. "I'm okay. A little sleepy," she said, coughing wetly once more. I frowned, glancing around the quiet street. "Is your daddy home? I'd like to talk to him," I said. She nodded and pointed up to the window on the second floor. I thanked her and headed inside, taking the stairs up and consulting the message from Vicky for the apartment number. I knocked lightly on the door, waiting a minute before the handsome man with tan skin and wavy brown hair answered. "Hi, Mr. Ramish. My name is Miranda. I'm with Child Protective Services. We got a call that your daughter is pretty sick and hasn't seen a doctor. May I come in?" I asked. He nodded, and I stepped inside the spacious apartment with polished oak floorboards and crown molding. "I'm so sorry to make you come all the way out here," Adish began. "Maya has a doctor's appointment tomorrow. I assure you she's being taken care of." I smiled, making a note in my book. "That's great to hear. How long has she been sick?" He sighed, glancing out the large picture window at the children playing. "About a week now. I kept hoping she would get better on her own, but she just seems to be getting sicker," he said, coughing slightly at the end of his words. I noticed he also looked a little pale, and his eyes were tinged with darkness as if he hadn't been getting enough sleep. "Perhaps you should see a doctor too," I said, my brows drawing together in concern. I fought the urge to cover my face with the sleeve, suddenly concerned for my own health. I just chuckled nervously, scratching at the back of his head. "Probably. The flu spreads so quickly I'd be surprised if I don't catch it at this point." I nodded, slipping my notepad back into my purse. "Well then, make sure you take Maya to the doctor. I'll stop back by tomorrow night to follow up. Have a good night, Mr. Ramish." With that, I slipped out the door and back down the stairs. As I entered the lobby, a shrill scream pierced the air from outside. Without hesitation, I sprinted out the door and down to the stone steps. Maya stood on the sidewalk near where the children were playing, crying softly. The group of children stared at her with anger and fear in their eyes, and in the middle of the group was a young boy lying on the ground. Maya jumped back as I rushed over to him, dropping to my knees, and rolling him onto his back. He was coughing and wheezing, and bright red blood splattered his lips and the concrete where he had been laying. His eyes were glossy and unseeing as they darted about wildly. He coughed violently, blood spurting from his mouth into the air and splattering across my face. I whipped up my phone and dialed 911 as I rolled the boy onto his side to help the flow of air. As we waited for the ambulance, I rubbed his back soothingly. "Focus on breathing. Help is coming," I murmured to him. I glanced up at the group of kids watching us in horror. Someone go get his parents, I ordered. What happened? The kid shuffled nervously before a boy a little older than Maya stepped forward. The witch did it! I groaned, glancing down at the boy in my arms as another violent cough racked his small body and crimson droplets marred the sidewalk. What witch? He cast a distrustful glance back at the apartment building I had just exited. It's all Maya's fault. She did this. First Tom and now Derek, he wailed, causing a few uneasy murmurs to ripple through the group of children. The sound of the ambulance sirens cut off any further discussion. The kids scattered back to their respective homes. The boy coughing weakly in my arms was quickly loaded into the back, and then the ambulance was speeding away down the street once more. I headed back up to Ramish's apartment, knocking briefly before Adish appeared once more. His eyes widened as he took in the blood smeared across my face. Are you all right, miss? I nodded, peeking around him to see Maya sitting in the living room, curled up on the couch. Is Maya okay? There was an incident outside. Adish nodded. She's a little shaken up, but she's okay. Maya coughed from the living room, and I watched as she discreetly wiped her hands across her mouth. Make sure she goes to the doctor tomorrow. I'll be back in the evening to check on her, I said. Adish nodded vigorously and wished me a good night. I made my way back out to the street, pausing only a moment when I saw the fresh blood still soaking the concrete. A shiver ran down my spine as I hastily crossed the street to my car, heading home for the night. The next evening I returned to the quiet neighborhood in West Village. The lights lining the street shone brightly in the night, illuminating my surroundings. As I approached the apartment, I glanced at the spot on the sidewalk from the day before. Only a dull brown stain remained, and I noticed that the street was incredibly quiet. Unnaturally so for this time of night. A chill danced down my spine as I glanced around for any sign of life, but there was none. The eerie silence weighed heavily on me, and my heart began racing in my chest. I turned in place, glancing out the windows and down the street for any indication I was not alone. Goosebumps rose across my skin, and I hurried towards the apartment, feeling as if hundreds of invisible eyes were boring through me. Hesitantly, I entered the apartment building and made my way up the stairs to Ramish's. I knocked on the metal door, my light taps resonating like booms through the empty halls. After hearing no response, I knocked again. Mr. Ramish? Maya? Anyone home? When there was still no response, I slipped my phone out of my pocket and sent a quick alert to Vicky with my location. I tried the doorknob, and to my surprise, the door swung open easily. Inside, the apartment was dark and just as silent as the rest of the neighborhood. I took a cautious step inside, scanning the shadows for any movement. Hello? I called again as I walked down the hall using my phone's flashlight to guide me. A raspy cough echoed from around the corner. I followed the sound, leading to a bedroom with the door partially opened. My heart hammering in my chest, I delicately nudged the door open. I shone the flashlight into the room, a startled gasp escaping me. Adish lay on the ground in a pool of blood. His skin was so sickly pale it was almost translucent, and his eyes had dark, heavy bags beneath them. A wet, hacking cough ripped through him, splattering more blood across the carpet. He lifted his head weakly to look at me, horror evident in his eyes. Leave now. Before she... He struggled with the words, the violent coughs and mouthfuls of blood making it difficult for him to speak. I backed out of the room slowly, stopping when my back hit the wall of the hallway. Cold sweat dotted my skin and dread settled deep into my bones. I turned my head towards the end of the hallway as I heard the sound of creaking floorboards. A startled shriek escaped my lips at the sight, and I clasped my hands over my mouth. At the end of the hallway stood Maya, or what was left of her. She looked as if she had wasted away overnight, her bones poked visibly at her skin, her arms no more than papery flesh clinging desperately to her bones. Her collarbones were sunken hollows as well as her cheeks. Her clothes hung in decaying tatters, and I could see her rib bones protruding unnaturally. Her legs trembled, barely able to hold up her body, and her eyes. The sockets were cavernous voids with two round, bulging eyeballs protruding farther than they should have been possible. A few wispy strands of brown hair clung feebly from her bony scalp. Maya? Maya? I said incredulously, unable to comprehend what had become of this girl. She placed a hand on the wall for support as she dragged her frail body towards me. A raspy cough racked her frame and drops of blood landed with a splat on the wood floor. Another step and another cough, and this time her legs finally collapsed. I sucked in a shaky breath, backing away from her, and choked. I sputtered helplessly for a moment before a hacking cough ripped through me. I covered my mouth with my hand, and as I pulled the shaking appendage away from me, I saw the bright crimson blood coating it. Maya reached a bony arm forward and then another, dragging herself across the floor towards me. I turned to run from the apartment, but as another viscous cough ripped through me, I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air. The dragging sound and the raspy coughs behind me continued and then multiplied as I too began struggling to reach the exit. Blood ran down my lips as I coughed weakly and my lungs burned painfully for air between the fits of coughs. Finally, as I grew lightheaded and my vision began to swim, darkness overtook me. When I came to, bright light burned my aching eyes and I heard the steady beeping of a heart monitor beside me. I groaned from behind an oxygen mask, my chest aching and my throat in shreds. A pair of warm, familiar hands clutched at my arm and I turned my head weakly to gaze into the hopeful face of my husband. "Miranda? Oh God, you're finally awake!" John said, relief flooding his voice. He squeezed my hand almost painfully, but I didn't say anything. I reached a shaking hand towards my face to remove the oxygen mask. "How long have I been out?" I whispered, my throat still raw. 2 days. Jesus Christ, Miranda, what happened?" he asked, running his hands over my hair, my face, as if assuring himself I was still there. I gulped, reaching for the glass of water on my bedside before I filled him in. As the cool liquid soothed my throat, Vicky entered the hospital room, a look of relief crossing her features. I set the glass back down and looked at the two of them. I was responding to a call from Maya Ramish. Her father said he would be taking her to the doctor. When I went back the next day to follow up, he was... Well, I don't know if he could have survived. And Maya... I sucked in a shaky breath. "Did you find them? Did they make it?" Vicky and John shot each other a puzzled look before Vicky spoke up. "Miranda? The apartment they found you in, the one you texted me, has been vacant for 6 months, she said, her eyes filled with concern as she looked me over and delivered the news. There was no one else there.